Who's the number one YouTuber you watch?
Grant Cohn. You gotta watch him. He's got the best information on sports.
Do you consider Kyle Shanahan's confidence, bravado, authentic?
This one came to me as I was listening to the Tim Kawakami podcast, and I just caught a couple of key statements from Kyle that brought this out. So I'll go through those and kind of give why I think that it may be an illusion. You hear him say that he was only willing to make this blockbuster trade to move up to 3 after he saw the Rams and Seahawks do it, and the result wasn't that terrible. He's like, well, they did it, and it wasn't the end of the world. Okay, so he doesn't really want to be a pioneer there. Is he afraid to take an unprecedented chance and look foolish? A guy who really has confidence and is convicted wouldn't be afraid of that. And he said he didn't consider taking Patrick Mahomes because he wasn't a consensus top 5 or top 10 pick.
That's a good point. He did say that.
Guess who didn't care that it wasn't a consensus pick was Andy Reid.
Right.
And look at the reward that he reaped there. Right.
Right.
And then I went on to think, okay, well, if those things are true, what about the fact that as the season went on in 2019, he seemed to tighten up and get more and more like, play calling kind of went back, more leaning more on the ground game. I don't trust Jimmy.
my
I'm going to take
quarterback.
the ball out of his hands, getting into the playoffs. And twice in a Super Bowl at halftime, he tightened right on up and couldn't hold on to a lead.
It was major pucker.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Major pucker.
He did twice in similar ways both times.
Yeah, so it led me to question, is he potentially not actually as secure and confident as he puts off? And I have to say that the evidence to this point seems to point that way.
I see what you're saying. Secure, confident. I feel like he's much more conservative than people realize. You look at his offense and you see big plays. You see him, he seems cutting edge and ahead of his time. You know what I mean? Not conservative in terms of his offense, but in terms of his decision making, his play calling, what he does under pressure, what he does with his roster, seems quite conservative and old school. I mean, he's a run first guy. He builds from the defensive line out. And he doesn't show like he's not big on going for it on 4th down. He doesn't show the big aggressiveness, bravado in those key moments. And you know who's similar like that? Jim Harbaugh.
I agree with that.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say that came to mind for me was Harbaugh at the end of the Super Bowl and in many big games. But down there at the goal line, and this is seared into my memory because fortunately or unfortunately, my father and I were sitting in the corner end zone in New Orleans looking down on that series of 4 plays that happened, the throws to Crabtree over and over and over again.
The same play.
But that timeout that would have been a cap draw into the end zone, probably to win the game, might have cost us the game. That and the refusal to run Frank Gore. But he seems to tighten up. Now that he's at Michigan, you see it in the big games, tightening up over and over and over again. And I agree with
Kyle. He's not a champion. He's very good. He's never won anything. Yeah. Same with Jim. Same with Harbaugh.
I respect the fact that he is old school. I think you make a fair point there. But to me, it doesn't erase the question mark that I now have. And until I see him take that next step in a game, in a big game, I will have that question. And I'm a big Kyle supporter.
I think you're absolutely right. You got to wonder, is he really that aggressive? Is he really that confident? Where was it? And the thing, let's go back to Harbaugh. I think that last sequence with against the Ravens, those 4 throws, coupled with how the next season ended, where they were in Seattle and they were about 15 yards out with, I don't know, a minute left, and they threw another fade to Crabtree, another one, and their season ended again on that play because Richard Sherman tipped it to Malcolm Smith. I was in the press box with Trent Baalke when that happened, and I'm not saying I heard him say anything, but I watched him walk out, and I felt like that's when the That's when the real fracture in the organization started, to lose back to back the same way. The same way. You have to lose confidence in Harbaugh at that point.
You have to. I mean, you don't have to. I suppose you could have seen through it. You could have realized that he still was the more special talent than Balky. But I get what you're saying there, in that it made it so that you had to question it.
And it's similar with Shanahan, because he did it twice. He blew it twice the same way. Shanahan's blown it twice the same way. There were just some years between.
Yes. And the second one, he bears all the responsibility for, right? As a head coach, the buck stops with you. Yeah, that Seahawks game, that was the worst I have ever felt leaving a stadium in the NFC Championship. Listening to those fans chant that dumb, I'm not even going to do it, but you know what it sounds like. It was awful.
If Jim Harbaugh had just erased the Crabtree fade, the Crabtree goal line fade from the playbook, they might have 2 Super Bowl rings. And if Kyle Shanahan had just stuck to his run game in the second half of the Super Bowls that he lost, he might have 2 rings too. So I don't know if it's a lack of confidence or lack of something, but it's interesting, the parallels between Kyle and Jim. They're very similar in that sense.
Yeah, and I get it to the extent that I understand when the pressure builds. I've related this to trying to do a recording of myself. If I'm trying to put down 5 minutes on film, and I get through what I want to say for 4 minutes and 30 seconds, that last 30 seconds in my mind, I'm like, well, don't screw this up, because you're doing a perfect take. And then I get up in my head. So I get it, but these are head coaches in the NFL. They've got to be able to progress past that, as I have been able to progress past that in speaking on camera, right? Yeah. If my profession were being a head coach, I would need to grow in that area. And so I think if Kyle wants to be more than just a stud offensive coordinator, he needs to take that next step.
Some people are just high-level losers, and that's what my dad and I always called Jim Harbaugh at the end. Andy Reid was a high-level loser for a long time, went to 5 straight NFC championship games. He did win it against the Niners. You could argue the Niners kind of blew it, that Andy Reid should have lost that one too, and then he lost his most recent one by a lot. I mean, Andy Reid in a lot of ways is a high-level loser. Is Kyle Shanahan a high-level loser? He's only 41. And that's why I think Niner fans stick by him. They're like, you know what? He has been. You could look at it that way, but you could also look at the way that he's been to 2 Super Bowls before he turned 41, and that's remarkable, and it is. So he's a Rorschach test. He's not a high-level loser yet, but that's the question. Because the high-level losers, what they do is they beat themselves. They get in their own way. They're really, really good. Mike Martz was the same way. It's like the pressure gets to them, and all of a sudden they're erratic. They're not themselves. They beat themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the 49ers fans need to realize that there is a possibility that Kyle doesn't come into his own for a few more years. And if we don't keep him around, it could be for that next team.
And, there's also a possibility that Kyle never comes into his own. I hate to do this. I like Kyle, but the thing he needs to show is growth and open-mindedness. Because with Robert Saleh, he had it. You could see it. You saw growth every year change. Kyle has a tendency to double down a little bit, like he's doing with the roster. No, we should have won last year. This works. So I'd like to see a little more growth.
Grant, I think that you should formulate a question around open-mindedness for the next time you get a chance to ask Kyle, because the dynamic of him having to answer that to you would be pretty spectacular.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I'm sure he'd love that. Well, I'll get right on that. Okay.
He'd be thrilled.